everyone, and welcome to this month's audio production town hall. We do this every month, and we're so glad that you are able to join us today. And just so you know, every month we do a different topic. It could be anything from recording to business, you name it, that's what we do. So hopefully you plan to join us on a regular basis. Today we are talking about client communication, and I know it doesn't sound super exciting, but I promise you we're going to get to some juicy things on that topic. I'm Monique Mason. I am the course director for entrepreneurship in the audio industry. And if you're in the audio programs, you will find me about 2 months before you graduate. Today, we have a very special guest, Mr. Sean Mendez-Catlin, Esquire of MC&J Law Firm here in Orlando. And so he's going to kind of serve as our unofficial expert on the subject matter. And prior to us getting off on this topic, just want to say that even though Mr. Mendez-Catlin is an attorney, this information is for educational purposes only and does not serve as legal advice. So if you have specific questions, you might want to seek out your own legal counsel. All that being said, Sean, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So here's kind of where the idea of this topic came from. We have a lot of students, early to mid-20s, and you know, there's those that think one form of communication is hip versus, you know, a little less cool. We have a lot of people who use TikTok to communicate. Maybe they use their Instagram DMs to communicate. The point is it doesn't matter from a business perspective. If you are a business owner and your client's like, oh, just send me a DM or whatever, and you're like, well, I don't use Facebook, I'm only on Instagram, you kind of have to broaden your platforms for communication. So with that being said, you're an attorney and you probably have clients across the board. In your opinion, well, first tell us kind of how you manage clients who want to communicate in different platforms, and then what would you say is a good way to try to manage it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a lot of different clients who are going to have different ways to communicate, and it's kind of the way of life. And in today's world with the internet and how many different platforms there are to communicate, you do really need to have a broader understanding of each platform if you want to be successful, right? So we use pretty much everything. I have a Discord, I have LinkedIn, I have Facebook, I have TikTok, I have Instagram. I'm trying to think what else we have out there. There's a whole bunch of different things. And having each one of them will open you up to a different group of people. In terms of managing it, there are a lot of different methods. So generally, having someone to help is definitely one of them. Making sure that your notifications are going to go off and have a banner or something that's going to notify you that you got a new message, definitely super important.
So I'm a big fan of email because I'm a very thorough communicator. And I know a lot of our students prefer not to use email in their communication, so they'll tell somebody, just send me a text message or whatever, which we will get into about why that can become problematic as far as communication. Do you think utilizing social media for business communication, which people do often, but do you think utilizing social media for business communication is sufficient, or do you think students, and I say our students because you guys are future business owners, should back up those communications by sending an email?
I think it'll depend on the type of conversation you're having.
Okay.
I think depending on the field you're in, right? A lot of the newer fields, technology fields, entertainment fields are about vibes, right? You have to have the right vibe and the right communication with people. So if it's something where the conversation is verbal, right? If you're on the Discord or Slack and you're communicating verbally, then I do think having that email follow-up to say, hey, here's what we spoke about today, here's what we agreed to, here's what we expect, is super important, just because Without that, you're going to have a lot of he said, she says, which is usually what leads to litigation if you're having a dispute in the future, or even if it's just in terms of the relationship maintaining its fluidity, right? Because if you're speaking from a trust perspective, I think that writing allows trust to continue, whereas a lot of relationships fall through because everything is relying on that trust. And then if there's a disagreement or someone misheard it, misremembered it, it can create friction. Even if it's not litigation, it might just be the deadline for some deliverable.
And I'm going to come back to that so we can have a little bit more detail on it. You mentioned you use Discord and some other. Is there a benefit other than opening up the options so your clients can, or you can communicate with clients on these? Like, in your opinion, like, why Discord versus just using an email? Like, you know, I mean, I know I have a thought process on the answer, but I'm asking you because you also run a business. Why even have Discord as an option?
So for me, I think that there's a lot to going toward what your client wants, right? If I have a client that I have to send 5 or 6 emails to get them to respond, but if I send them a Discord message and they respond in 10 minutes, it will help my business and help their business for me to simply say, okay, if I'm talking to this particular client, then I'm going to use Discord. Another one is WhatsApp, right? If I have a client that's overseas and it's easier for them to send me communications through WhatsApp, then many times I'll do that because I've had moments where I send an email, it's been 2 days, it's been 3 days, I don't get a response, I send a second email, and then after a while they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I missed the first email. Whereas when I send them messages on WhatsApp, I get responses in seconds most of the time.
So really, it's about expediting the communication and expediting the response.
Absolutely.
But not necessarily relying on it, because you're still going to follow up with an email, right?
Yeah, many times I'll follow up with an email. For me, again, it depends on if the communication is written or not. If it's something that's very formal, so like we have a lot of things where it's a settlement authorization or things like that, that one I'm going to send an email. I'll normally send the WhatsApp saying, hey, just want to let you know I'm going to be sending you this document. If you can review it, if you agree with what's in it, you know, we're authorizing a settlement for $10,000, whatever it is. Sign it and then get it back to me. I'll then send the email with the document. But if it is something more along the lines of just like an update for them or we had a phone conversation, I will generally default to what I think they'll receive, right? Because if I send them a email update about a conversation we had, but they don't check email, it hasn't actually served its purpose, right? Because things like WhatsApp, Discord, because they have that chat box that's gonna have a date, time stamp, and all those things, that part becomes easier. Now, the second part of that is how confidential is the information that you're talking about. I would not send super confidential information over text message or other things because there is more vulnerabilities there.
So you mean like social security numbers, bank
Yes.
account information, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would not send that way. You know, we've even had government officials who have had things happen, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want that moment where you send it, and even in terms of who you're sending it to, sometimes the text messages are, or Discord, Slack, are a little more informal. And so you'll have moments where you might send it to the wrong person just because you're not checking it as thoroughly as you should be.
Well, that's a good one. Yeah. So I kind of want to compare this. We were having this conversation before for our audience. In my class, one of the things that I mentioned is if you are somebody who sells merch, let's say you're an artist and you sell merch. If somebody comes up to your table to buy your merch and you're like, oh, we only have Cash App, you just lost a sale. So whether or not you think the communication platform is cool or whatever, you need to broaden the scope so you can communicate with however. And one of my activities, I have students create like a service request form. And I notice a lot of them put on their best form or best way to communicate with you, or you know, like, and I've seen this too on other things. It'll ask me, what's the best way to get in touch with you? usually the options are only email or a text message. Now, other is kind of necessary, but keeping track of those others for each individual client can become a headache. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you guys keep track of which way you're supposed to keep communicating? That's got to be a pain,
Oh yeah,
for lack
absolutely.
of another word. But that's got to be a pain. Going, oh, this is this client. They prefer Discord. Oh, it's this client. I got to text them. Like, how do you keep up with that?
So we have a case management system.
Okay.
I'm not sponsored by them, but we use Clio. There are other things like Practice Panther for law firms and things, but there are many different ones. My parents, my father's a physician. He has Practice Fusion, which is for medical things.
So there's stuff like that for different
different fields.
Okay.
Yeah. And with our system, what we can do is, you put in a contact, you put in a matter, you put in what the person wants to be called, right? What the person how they prefer to be contacted, what's the best, is it a phone number, is it an email, is it whatnot? And some of these will actually have an internal communication line, right? So I can send text messages through it if I needed to, and it will keep a log. I think the most important part for record-keeping purposes is making sure that there's a log of when you've contacted them. But that's one of the ways that we make sure that we're staying on top of the different methods. Another one is just having intentionality in your schedule. So I try and make sure that we schedule in, all right, I need to check the Facebook Messenger. We need to check the Instagram messages. We need to check Discord, because while I might want to contact them through email, they don't always contact me through email, right? And so we'll get new clients in where they write us on Facebook, right? They see a post, they see something else, and so they message us through Facebook. Same thing with Instagram or TikTok. And so you just have to be intentional to make sure that you are checking all the things, because just because you don't use it doesn't mean they're not going to use it.
I think that's a good point to bring up. So for anybody out there who's actually taking what we're saying into consideration, I think what Sean said is really important, because I often get students who are like, oh, I don't check my email. I'm like, you can't not check your email. If that is the way I'm telling you I'm going to communicate, or if your client tells you I'm going to send you an email, you have to be diligent about checking those things. And so if you open yourself up to these different platforms, you need to be diligent and mindful about checking all the ways. It's kind of like checking all the windows and the doors in your house. Any way somebody can get in, you should be checking it, for any type of communication. So I kind of want to lean a little bit towards something else you were saying. You were talking about confidentiality and using these different platforms. In the world of small business, is it the business owner's responsibility to make sure the platform they are choosing, or the one that the client chose, is secure? Like, I don't know, I'm going to say Facebook Messenger is not very secure. Yeah. In that instance, if the client is like, well, I prefer to speak through Messenger, is it my responsibility to tell the client or give them some kind of warning or something like, this is your choice. If any information is leaked, it's not my fault. Does that work?
I think it'll depend on the situation, right? For the legal field, it's a lot different, right? We have the bar ethics rules and things like that. But if it is, let's say you're collaborating on a song with someone and you guys are sharing the actual music, right, that you've made, if you send it on a platform where it can be leaked, and now it gets leaked out, and you knew that there was an issue there, I think it always is safe to say, listen, I don't know that we should use this. I'd prefer if we use a different method. And if the person is really pushy, at least you have that communication written down.
You have something that shows.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm going there too. That's coming. So just to kind of follow up on my question, so you're saying, in my verbiage, I should just acknowledge, like, I'm not comfortable with this communication for this particular transaction. And if the person persists, then the fact that I acknowledge that, I know you can't say for all legal situations, but at least I put it out there, like, this is not how I wanted to do this.
Yeah.
In some way, because that kind of leads me to the next thing. and I apologize if I jump around a little bit on this, but you also do litigation. And I've seen court proceedings where a client will bring in text messages, emails, like, oh no, I sent them a text on this day. Oh no, I sent an email on this day. When you're using all these different platforms to communicate, what sort of struggles does that create should you have to support yourself using these as documents in a potential litigation situation?
Yeah, in today's world, it's a lot more common, right? And there are ways for us to get a lot of different things into court as evidence. I think where it becomes a headache is in what we call the discovery process. So essentially, in the middle of the litigation, both sides are exchanging information. And the more various platforms you use to communicate, the more evidence there's going to be. And so, sometimes that can increase fees, right? Where the attorney has to go through everything, the attorney has to parse what conversations happen. Because sometimes you'll have a conversation that starts in email, then turns into a phone call, which then turns into a text message, which then the people blow up about it on Facebook, right? And so now that's 4 or 5 different areas that we have to go through together to figure out how this conversation went. So that becomes a strategy issue for a lot of the attorneys. And then in court, it can make things a little more convoluted because each of those things will generally be a different piece of evidence. Sometimes we can try and crunch them together, but a lot of times it's going to be, all right, here's Exhibit A with the email. Here's Exhibit B, there's going to be the phone calls. Here's Exhibit C, and so you might end up having tons of exhibits if you guys have conversations in different places.
What about formality of conversation or lack thereof? It's very easy to be less formal when you're speaking through a message platform versus sending an email. I find more people tend to be a little bit more business professional when they're trying to send an email, but when you're communicating, does that, in your opinion, do you think that can create some concern? For me, if I'm a small business owner and I'm doing this and I'm speaking in tech speak and real chill, very informal with the client on one and then more formal in another, does the style of communication create an issue at all?
I don't know if it'll create a legal issue unless it's something where it's just so colloquial that we can't understand what the conversation's about.
Okay.
That can create an issue, right? If you're speaking in code and there are terms that people don't generally use, now it becomes a lot harder if the sides are arguing over what was supposed to happen or not supposed to happen. It becomes way harder now because it's like, well, I don't know what this phrase means. And so now both of you can argue to say like, well, I meant it this way and they meant it that way. For general slang terminology, as long as it's something that can be understood from a legal perspective, it won't necessarily create an issue. I think from a business perspective, though, people will act differently depending on the level of professionalism that's shown. I think the more friendly it is, the more it is on, like we said, on the vibes, then there is that level of informality, but that will transfer into how the relationship develops. And like I said earlier in the beginning, I think that in the beginning it can be built on trust, but I think that once you've gotten there, trust only goes but so far. And so that's when I think you kind of want to set the tone for how the relationship's going to be.
So I want to digress, if I can, a little bit back to where we started, which is about the various platforms. So in this day and age where a lot of conversation is about AI, and we're discovering that a lot of the platforms we use allow AI to train from our conversations. This kind of comes back to selecting the platform or confirming the platform, and then the confidentiality of what the conversation is about. So would you say, as the business owner, I need to be diligent about reading terms and conditions and looking for options to opt out, or warning the client that the platform you chose allows AI to train and there's no way for us to get out of this? We should You know what I mean? Like, I'm just trying to figure out a good way to get the students to kind of corral the client to something that's more just better for the business, and also to be aware of the fact that there are some platforms out there that are allowing that.
Yeah, I think it's important to know at least the basics of any tool that you're going to use, right? Because that's all these are, tools.
Sure.
Outlook is a tool, ChatGPT is a tool. And if you don't know what it's doing on the back end, then you can't really make an informed decision about using it. And especially if you're doing things in the creative world, you have to be careful, because if it is learning, let's say, from your works, could that potentially create an issue with you being able to protect it in the future?
About that.
You know, if you're using, let's say you're using a school platform, but that school has a clause in there that says, like, anything that's done on the school platform is owned and operated by the school, right? Now you've sent your creative work over there, and the school now might have a claim to saying, hey, this was created through our platform, on our platform, and so we should, you know, have ownership rights over it. And a lot of schools don't, right? Some schools will have the exact opposite clause in there.
Right.
But if you don't know anything about the system, you open yourself up to that.
Right.
Facebook, for example, for the longest time with pictures, if you were putting pictures on there, Facebook was taking a right to be able to reproduce those pictures as they kind of saw fit. So just understanding what it is, so again, so that when you're having that conversation, and it'll help give you credibility, right? When the person's saying, hey, I'm going to send this, and you go, well, let's send it on this platform, because I think that would be, you know, more protective for us on what we're trying to do, helps your credibility in that situation.
Is there any particular platform you think would be good for small business owners? Because here's the thing, and I say this to you and to the audience, so we can kind of figure this out. As a society, we have a tendency to jump on the new hot thing, which can become problematic. And then you start marketing yourself through that platform. Now you're communicating through that platform. So to your point, educate yourself on the platform you're using, and we don't have to disparage any particular brand, but is there any one that you can think of that you think is fairly safe for us as business owners to use in communications that would be a good idea to corral?
Yeah, I think it depends on where your business is at.
Okay.
I think email is one that we have a general understanding of what most email providers are doing. We have an understanding of what information they may or may not keep, the encryption levels that they have. You know, given the level of cybercrime that happens now, I think that having an encrypted email is usually the safest method, right? Where it's going to be very hard for someone else to gain access to that without you, like, clicking on a link or doing something else. Whereas some of the other things are going to be, people can backdoor their way, right? They're going to piggyback onto, like, you send something out, now they've piggybacked onto it. I think for the most part, WhatsApp is also pretty secure, right? A lot of that's going to be encrypted. I don't believe WhatsApp has the ability to really, like, go in and look at what your messages are saying. So those are two pretty secure methods, I think, of communication. Outside of that, you know, maybe it's financial. You know, you want to make sure you're going with, like, a reputable company, one that people know, that has, you know, FDIC insurance, all that fun stuff, just to make sure that you're not having somebody bust in on your transactions.
And a lot of people just are not tech savvy, so they don't really know what they should be looking for. So that might be the start right there, is to really teach the business owners, like, you have to protect. And there are laws out there about protecting communications, right?
Yes, absolutely.
We're in the state of Florida, so and you're also licensed to practice in New York. And I don't want to steer too far away from this, because I know a lot of people also try to record through some platforms, like Zoom, for example. Some people go, well, I'll just record this Zoom meeting, and then that'll be evidence of our conversation. But that's still, even that still required. And I think Facebook has some recording options in their messenger as well.
Yeah.
So what should we be looking out for if the goal is to record the conversation through these different platforms?
Yeah, I mean, the general gist of it is you want to make sure that the person knows that they're being recorded. I know iPhones now have a recording option for phone calls.
Yeah.
But you'll notice that all those platforms have something where it'll be like, this is a recording, or it's going to be, or this call will be recorded, and it'll have a countdown and other things like that. There are essentially espionage rules where you're not supposed to be recording someone in a private conversation without their knowledge. So
That's universal?
universal. You're
Okay.
not, if it's a private conversation, it should not be recorded without the parties understanding that the conversation is recorded. And in some jurisdictions, it is a crime for you to do it, right? So it might be a misdemeanor, it might be a felony, it just depends on the jurisdiction you're in. What it can do on the civil side is if the person didn't know and you've recorded them, the court might not allow it in, right? They might say this recording is not admissible because the other person didn't know they were being recorded. It was achieved in violation of the law, and so we're not going to allow it in. So you do want to make sure that you're following those rules. If it's a really super important conversation, again, let them know. You put it in writing. We're going to have a meeting on Tuesday. I intend to record it. It's going to be on Zoom, and then start the recording after the person has gotten into the room. And then I would put on the recording, we had this, we're recording right now, so anyone who stays understands that this is being recorded and can be used at a later time. Yeah.
So just want the audience to be mindful of that because, like I said, a lot of these platforms now in the chat or the Messenger app, it does allow you to record. And to your point, even our phone, and I've accidentally hit the record sometimes because on my phone, the button's like right there by your cheek, and then it'll just start recording and you have to quick turn it off because that wasn't my intention. So yes, be mindful of utilizing these different communication platforms to also record because that's probably not the way to go either, especially if the other person doesn't know there's a recording taking place. And then what are your intentions with that recording as well, right? That should be, so that brings me to this. And you had already said about the documentation. If you're going to use all these different platforms to communicate, documentation. I'm the queen of screenshots. If somebody sends me, or if I utilize a chat option for a company that, like the electric company or whatever, and they're like, talk to our chat. I'll screenshot the chat after they confirmed my question. So if I have to argue with somebody, I'm like, this came from the chat I had, that sort of thing. So I guess the same thing with documenting the conversations, just like I'm assuming, and I shouldn't do that, but I'm assuming from a legal standpoint, you might want to keep everything in kind of like a chronological order. Because I'll screenshot it and dump it in a folder and just make sure the date's on everything. Is that the best way to handle it?
Yeah, I think having a chronological order to a conversation or to communications is usually easiest because many times if you're gonna have to use it somewhere else, you're probably gonna do it in chronological order, right? We had a conversation on Tuesday, then we had one on Wednesday, we had one on Thursday. I think that it depends on the platforms you're using. Having something that allows you to organize is gonna be best. Like I said, we have a practice management system and we can go in and put a note on every file that says, we spoke with the client on Monday, we spoke with the client on Wednesday, it was an email on Thursday. So that way, if there is a dispute as to what was happening, you have a real-time record to go like, even if you don't have the call recorded, you at least show like, I spoke to them on Tuesday the 23rd at 3 p.m. Here's the note that I put in showing that I spoke to them on that date. And a lot of courts will at least take that at some value, right? It'll add some weight to your story. But at the same time, I think it will depend on what you're using, right? If it's something that can't be organized really well, then you're kind of going to run into the same issue you would have as if you didn't take the notes.
So I like where you're going with that because I think I'm all about organization. So I like the idea, for those of you watching, create a log of the communication, especially when you're talking to people across different platforms. Because I'm famous for being like, oh, was that in a text message or were we on chat? Because sometimes I'll be talking to the same person on 2 different platforms at the same time, because you sent me a file on this one and then you told me to go look at it on this one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the log is going to be really important as you guys are moving forward and dealing with clients across platforms. But the key here is You can't tell the client, I don't check my emails. That's not professionally going to work. You need to open yourself across the platforms. Now, if you choose to have one streamlined communication, then communicate that to the client in writing, right? And then be diligent about forcing the communications over to that platform. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah,
I don't know.
correct.
I don't want to put my assumptions on, put my practices on everybody, but
Yeah, we do the same, right? So I might start a conversation in a text message chain, and I'll say, like, for us, email is the easiest method, right? We have access to it on all of our computers, it's on our phones, it's kind of everywhere we are, and it notifies us the way that is best for our firm. So I might start a conversation in a text message, and then I'll say, we're gonna send you an email, to schedule our consultation or whatever it is that I'm gonna talk to them about, just so that they will be kind of pushed towards our method. And again, if that method doesn't work, we have the ability to pivot, right? If let's say we send them that email and they never get back to us for the consultation, and we send a second email and a third email, then maybe we go, okay, let's go back to text message because they answered when we texted them,
right.
and they didn't answer through this method.
And then I guess for me, kind of my last question, if you guys are watching and you have questions, let us know. This is a live interview, so let us know if you have any questions. But I know this is one some people might bring up as we talk about jurisdiction recording on Zoom and Facebook and whatever.
Yeah.
Is it possible? So I'm going to try to select my words carefully because I know we have to be careful. It's possible in those communications you can create an agreement, but an agreement is not always a contract. So, like, we need to be mindful of that, right?
Yeah.
In those types of communications where we're like, oh, well, you told me you were going to do this. It could establish a contractual obligation. It's all about the verbiage, right?
Yeah, I think for me, it depends on the order of operations. The only thing I would change there is I would say if you have an agreement in writing,
That's a big if.
Yeah, if you have an agreement in writing.
Because a lot of people are doing business here without putting things in writing.
Yeah.
And they're relying on the text message, the DM, and so that's a big if to this crowd.
At least for court purposes, if it is, when I say in writing, I mean any writing, right? So if you say, I'm going to give you X service by Y date, and you're going to pay me $100, and the person says, bet, $100, I got you, that can be a contract,
sure.
right? It's a written agreement. It can be done in a certain amount of time, so you might contractually get yourself into it. Now, there can be oral agreements as well. Those ones are usually the hardest to prove.
Correct.
Because it's a conversation.
Right.
But for me, it's order of operations, because if you agree to something verbally and then end up writing something down and what you've written is different from what you agreed to verbally, what's written will probably control versus what you talked about. And so you want to just make sure if you are doing a written agreement that everything is the way that you expect it to be, because if it's not, if they said they were going to give you green M&Ms and you didn't put it in writing and then you signed something that just said they're going to give M&Ms, that green part's probably not going to fly.
Right. And can you, if you don't mind, because I understand it, but I don't know if our audience understands this. A lot of people interchange verbal and oral agreements. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, so a verbal agreement is really exactly that. It's a conversation where you agree to do, A and they're going to give you B, right? That is going to be a verbal agreement. If I verbally tell someone, I'll sell you my house for $200, it's a verbal agreement. The written agreement, we normally think like contract, formal paper and all that, but it can be anything. If you write it down on a napkin and you have that napkin and can bring it to court, then that would be considered a written agreement. What the formal contracts do is they normally are going to give you more protections because they're going to tell you, if this person does this, then we can do this. Whereas if you're doing something in a text message, a lot of times all you really have is that base, I'm going to do this and you're going to pay me.
So text message is considered verbal?
Text is going to be considered written.
Okay.
Yeah, text, email, anything that is like typing it is going to be considered a written agreement.
Okay.
Anything that's, if it's over Zoom, if it's a phone conversation, a voice note, right? All those are going to be verbal.
Oh, a voice note?
Yeah, it's technically a verbal
'cause it's
agreement.
just audio.
Right? It's just audio.
Got you.
But that audio can be entered, if you're in court, we can present that audio to the court and say, hey, this is what they said they were going to do. It's a verbal agreement.
Very interesting. Let's see. Oh, we have a question.
All right, so we have a question from Jonathan in the audio production degree program. They're asking if they create one of these agreements or contracts, are you also required to have an LLC or freelance business license?
I think it would depend on the contract.
Yeah.
Most contracts, no. If it's just you want to, and you said it was in the audio engineering?
Audio production.
Audio production, okay. So if it's a contract where you're going to help with
engineering or something.
Yeah, the engineering on a song or engineering on a show or something, you can, of course, do that just as a person, right? We call it a sole proprietor if you want to get into the weeds of it. The boring of it, I always say it's like Spider-Man. He's out in Queens, he's doing his own thing. He's a sole proprietor, he doesn't really have a business. You can do it that way. The issue is you're going to open up yourself to a company or the person you're working with going after your personal assets as opposed to your business assets. So most attorneys will not recommend sole proprietorships unless it's something really small that you don't have much risk. If you want to protect yourself more, then you would do the LLC route or a corporation or a nonprofit, or there's a bunch of different options there.
So it really boils down to the liability and what you're agreeing to do.
Yeah, unless it's something that's like you need a license to do it. Sometimes that's going to be something where you need an LLC or something. But even then, as long as you're licensed personally, you can do it yourself.
And for most of you in the audio industry, a license isn't required to be a recording engineer, a mix engineer, or anything like that. I mean, you guys can get different certificates to kind of legitimize what you do, but from a business perspective, there's no license for professional license. Let's be specific. Like Sean, to practice law, needs a license to be a lawyer. I don't need a license if I'm going to be a mix engineer. So to kind of narrow down what he was saying, if you're a sole proprietor, you open yourself up to more risk because of the liability, depending on what you're agreeing to, right?
Yeah.
If there's a lot of liability in what it is that you're agreeing to do, then you may want to consider developing or creating an entity for your business. Hopefully we answered that. Do we have any other questions? Not at this time. Okay, so closing remarks, I guess we'll do. I'll do mine first, and then I'll let Sean give you time to think about your answer. So as an educator here at Full Sail University, and I teach entrepreneurship, I'm all about the organization and how you communicate as part of that organization. Remaining professional with your clients. Yes, you can leave yourself open to these different platforms. You don't want to not check a platform. If a client reached out to you through Instagram and you're like, well, I'm only on TikTok, that doesn't mean ignore Instagram, right? And particularly if it's an existing client communicating with you. So put it in your schedule to check your different communication options, right? Including your website, particularly your website. Mine gives me notifications when an email comes through the website. So try to link things up to the one thing you do check if you're going to try to do it that way. I actually think that's a good idea. Now that I'm thinking about it, like all the social media platforms should give you an option to link to a business email. Well, I guess most of them do.
Yeah, a lot of them will have that
I guess they kind of do already. I thought I was creating something new. Oh well. But any closing comments on your end on the topic?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different options out there. So for me, the way I think about it is platforms change, but professionalism does not.
Oh, I like that.
So having that flexibility to try out different platforms, to look at the different things, and then have your pipeline essentially where you're gonna say, we start at A, B, C, and D, but we always come back to E, right? That's the easiest way to do it, but be flexible. At the end of the day, as long as you're able to document things and do it in a safe manner, you want to make sure that your clients feel comfortable as well. And if it is something where you're going to straight up lose the client, as long as you are informing them that you don't think it's the best route, or that, you know, this platform isn't as secure, I think that you at least have that ability to try and keep the client by keeping them, you know, happy.
I think that's one of the biggest things for me is the confidentiality. We're so quick, we're so used to these convenient forms of communication. People are quick to be like, oh, here's my birthday, here's my social security. And I'm like, no, you know what I mean? And so I am diligent about telling students to get FEIN numbers for their business, even though legally you could use your social security number as a sole proprietor. But don't give your social security number out over a text message, you know, Instagram or whatever. Like, that's just, you're just asking for problems at that point.
Yeah, if you're giving out like confidential, secure information, make sure it's encrypted, right? You want to make sure that people can't just go in and look at it. You know, if it's just a regular text message and SMS, that's really not super secure. I believe iMessage is encrypted, right? Which is why we had a whole bunch of issues where the cops couldn't get into people's phones and figure out things. But you know, you want to make sure that the communication method is encrypted.
Okay, so I think that wraps it up for us today. Thank you guys for joining us. We hope to see you next month at the next audio production town hall meeting. See you guys soon.